ideas. This year, for the first time, we're coming together virtually. So if you're joining us from Kentucky, would you please put a thumbs up emoji in the chat or the reaction so we know you're there? And also, if you're coming to us from somewhere else, please put a thumbs up emoji in the chat or reaction so we can see that you're here. Thank you. We're happy to have you join us this year. My name is Valerie Casey, and I'm the director of the U of L's Women's Center. To get us started, we have a few housekeeping rules. To ensure an engaging and smooth program for all, we will ask that you keep your cameras off during the program. Your mic will be muted, and make sure you show some love to our speakers and volunteers throughout the program. We want you to actively engage with us, so please use the chat for any questions, comments, and reactions throughout. The program will be recorded and posted next week on the Women's Center YouTube page. There'll be a question and answer at the end of the program where you'll have a chance to ask a question by typing it into the chat. This will also include questions that were already submitted during registration. We ask everyone to turn on their cameras for a group photo at the end of the program. So please stay engaged and meet us there. And please be patient with us as we work our way through this new virtual world. So today's festival is brought to you by the U of L Women's Center and Women Who Write. As in the past, we're fortunate to have the support of the award-winning Carmichael's Bookstore, where you may order both of the books you'll hear about today. To receive a signed copy of the book, so there are a limited number, first come, first serve, but insert that you attended the Kentucky Women's Book Festival in the note portion during checkout and request a signed copy. Thank you to everyone for your support. I also want to thank the planning committee for working to make this year's festival happen. Our co-chairs are Robin Harris and Phyllis M. Webb, and members Peggy Grimes, Amy Purcell, Letitia Reynolds, Jamaica Jones, Patsy Russell, Miranda Massman, and Valerie Casey. The Kentucky Women's Book Festival began in 2006. It was the dream of the late Rita Jones, a Louisville author, playwright, and historian, who envisioned a Louisville Book Festival with Kentucky women writers as its focus. To make her dream become a reality in the early 2000s, Rita brought together colleagues and friends from her 12 years in U of L's Human Resources Department, along with authors from the writing group she founded in the early 1990s. That group was Women Who Write. The Women's Center embraced her dream and have been supporting the festival for these many years. Sadly, Rita Jones passed away in May of 2020, but her spirit and vision continue to inspire and motivate the festival planners. Besides the tragic loss of the festival's founder in 2020, we also lost our dear friend and colleague, Dr. Annette Allen, who passed away in December. Dr. Allen, Professor Emerita of Humanities at U of L, was an award-winning poet, a beloved mentor, and a vital member of the planning committee for the festival for these 10 years. Annette's connections to the literary community helped the festival attract wonderful and diverse authors. The festival plans to honor both Rita Jones and Annette Allen more fully in the 2022 festival when we hope to gather in person. But we cannot let this day go by without acknowledging the loss of both of these fine authors and recognizing the contributions they made to the literary life of this community. A memorial service for Dr. Allen took place on February 24th, 2021, and a link to her moving tribute is available in the chat. 2 humanities scholarships are being set up in Dr. Allen's name, one for mentorship and one for interdisciplinary creativity. For more information, please contact contact Robert Eric Shoemaker, whose email is now in the chat. So now it is my a great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Cassie Chambers Armstrong, visiting professor at Brandeis School of Law, Louisville Metro Councilwoman for the 8th District, Vice Chair of the Kentucky Democratic Party, and mother of 2. She holds an undergraduate and master's degree from Yale, a degree in public management from London School of Economics, and a law degree from Harvard. In addition, she received a Skadden Fellowship to do legal work with survivors of domestic abuse in rural Kentucky. Today, Cassie Armstrong will talk to us about her widely acclaimed book, Hill Women: Finding Family and a Way Forward in the Appalachian Mountains. If you think you know about Appalachian life, this fascinating autobiography just might reveal how little you really know, especially about the women of the region, whose strength, intelligence, and resilience Armstrong brings to vibrant life through her strong storytelling skills. Her granny, her Aunt Ruth, and especially her mother Wilma come to life and stay with the reader long after their inspiring and sometimes sad stories come to the end. Armstrong makes a strong case that her considerable academic and professional successes are rooted in her Eastern Kentucky upbringing. Hill Women, published in 2020 by Ballantine Books and now available in paperback, received reviews from Booklist, Literary Journal, Kirkus Reviews, and Slate. In the words of Publishers Weekly, women in Kentucky's Appalachian community come into focus in lawyer Chambers' powerful debut memoir, which aims to put a human face on a stereotyped region. This is a passionate memoir, one that honors Appalachian residents. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Cassie Chambers Armstrong. Please show her some love in the chat.
Well, thank you all so much for having me here today. Make sure all my technology is working. If someone could just give us a thumbs up in the chat that everyone can hear me. Okay. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm really glad to be here with you all today. And I want to start off by talking just a little bit about Hill Women, how I wrote it, how I see it sort of intersecting with other things, other conversations about Appalachia, and some of the things that I hope readers will take away from it, and then would love and welcoming the opportunity to have a conversation with you all about questions you have, some of the things, if you've read it, that you've taken away from it, because I really do value hearing from people who have either read the book and have thoughts or questions, and also just people who are thinking about these things, thinking about particularly communities that are struggling, areas where women, we haven't been lifting up their voices enough, and how the way that literature and books interact with all of that, and how that books and literature are a way that we move communities forward. So very much looking forward to the question and answer at the end. And I will tell you right now, and I'll repeat it several times, I'm a big believer that there is nothing that is sort of off limits. It's very hard to offend me. I joke that I'm in politics. I'm not vice chair of the Kentucky Democratic Party anymore. I rolled off of that after I took office on Metro Council. But being in sort of politics, you develop thick skin, and in some ways writing a memoir is good training for that, because you get a lot of comments from folks, which I always value, but sometimes it is amazing when people disagree with you. They will take a lot of time to sit and write a very long email about it. So nothing is off limits, and I'm looking forward to hearing your all's questions at the end. So Hill Women is fundamentally a book that is designed to honor the women that have sort of given me opportunities in my life. And just a little bit by way of background about me, I was born to a family that didn't have a lot of resources. My mom was a college student. My dad was a college student. They brought me home from the hospital to a rented trailer that they couldn't afford to turn on the air conditioner in, because it would have caused the electricity bill to be too much during that month. And so, although I came from very humble beginnings, and I was born into a family that had a lot of challenges, my family, my community gave me opportunities. And I'm going to talk more about that later on, but sort of the end of the story, to jump ahead, is that I had the opportunity to go to Yale College, the Yale School of Public Health, the London School of Economics, and Harvard Law School. And so sort of at its outset, that looks like this sort of rags to riches, poverty to prosperity type of story that we so often hear about, this idea that someone is born into poverty and then you go on to have different types of opportunities. And a lot of times we focus on the individual in those circumstances. We focus on sort of what that person has done to create opportunities. And I think we see that in books like Hillbilly Elegy or some of these other narratives where it's, you know, what I did, the choices I made. And I think we too often simplify those choices and the way that progress happens and the way that economic mobility works. And it's not, in my experience, necessarily about what I did, the choices I made. It's that it really took lots of systems, lots of people, a community, and 3 generations of women in my family sort of striving to create those opportunities. And I was the one that was able to take advantage of them, but they were things that were a long time in the making. And so that's sort of where women comes from, is what does it take to create those opportunities? Why was I fortunate enough to be able to do these things in my life? And who is responsible for those opportunities? And in my view, it really goes back to the women in my family. And so I want to talk a little bit about those women and a little bit about the community that they came from and about the community that I came from, because I think we are all products of the communities that we grow up in and the communities that we create for others. And so Hill Women is set in Owsley County, Kentucky. It's where my family is from. It is a place that is one of the poorest counties in America. It has the lowest income by population as any place in America for a family of 4. It has a lot of people that aren't participating in the workforce, either because they just can't find jobs or because the rate of people with disabilities is so high. And so it's a community that really struggles. It's also a place where there is a lot of hope and a lot of creative, gritty, smart people who are working to solve their community's problems. And I think so often when we're talking about impoverished communities, we paint it with this broad brush. We want people to understand how extreme and severe the problems are. And so we forget to mention that, you know, there are smart people who are working hard, who are making progress, who are doing good things in their community. And so I want to start off. I promise I'm not going to read a lot from the book, but for those of you who haven't read it, just to give you a bit of a flavor and also to situate our conversation, I want to start by talking a little bit, reading a little bit from the introduction about Owsley County. This is set whenever I am sort of driving from Berea, Kentucky into Owsley County, and really sort of thinking about how do I balance this idea of showing people the poverty, showing them the problems, talking about the problems, with also talking about sort of the good things that are happening there. So if anyone has a copy of the book, I am on Roman numeral X from the introduction. It's hard for me to know which part of Owsley County I should show the rest of the world. Presenting the broken, falling in places helps people understand the extent of the poverty. And I do want them to know how deep it goes. Maybe if they understand it, they can help fix it. But I also don't want them to think that this poverty is all that exists in Appalachia. To see Eastern Kentucky as hopeless, broken, dirty. That's not what I see when I look at this place that I love. Some people look at this image of poverty with a sense of disgust. They see unkempt humans living in unkempt homes. Others view it with a sense of pity, those poor people trapped in such awful circumstances. I try to look at it with a sense of respect, to remember how hard they are working to survive in the overlooked corner of the world they call home. That last view of Owsley County feels the truest to me, even if the other views fit more easily into categories outsiders want to create. For me, there is hope in the spirit of a people who find creative ways to exist in a community that has been systematically marginalized. in men and women who take care of each other, even when the outside world does not take care of them, in people who broke their bodies in tobacco fields and coal mines to make a living in the only community they have ever known. We don't take the time to see it, the hope in the poverty, the spark against the dreary backdrop, the grit in the mountain women. And so for me, the idea of grit in the mountain women is really the jumping off point of this book and really how this book came into being. I was lucky enough to know a lot of fiery, cantankerous, stubborn, wonderful Appalachian women that are at the core of who I am and at the core of the community that I grew up in. And the first one I want to talk a little bit about is my granny, because that's where this book begins, is with my granny. My granny grew up in some of the most extreme rural poverty that I think we can imagine. She lived in a house that was so cold in the wintertime that her blankets in her house would freeze because it was so cold at night. She started working from a very young age. As soon as she was old enough to go to work in the tobacco fields, she was expected to do that. She lived in a family where really awful things happened, because that's what happens in extreme poverty. Her younger sister died from horrific burns in a fire because that was how they kept the house heated, was with a fireplace, and it wasn't up to code. And her younger sister tragically died as a result of the family just trying to keep their house warm. And she never had a childhood. Now that I'm a mom of 2 kids myself, I think about that a lot when I'm hoping later this weekend to be able to take my kids to the zoo or get them outside to the park. And those are things that my granny never had the chance to do. She was always working from a very young age. She didn't have play dates. She didn't go to libraries. She didn't even have the opportunity to go to school for very long, because her family needed her to help out in the tobacco fields, to help make sure that they had money to be able to feed everyone. And it wasn't always necessarily a given that there was going to be enough food to feed everyone as much as they would want to eat. And so although my granny grew up very poor and didn't have a childhood, got married at 16, started having kids at 17, she never had a chance to get an education for herself. She somehow came to understand that education was a really important tool for communities and a really important thing for her to be able to give to her children. And I think about this a lot. Where did this idea come from? How did she know this? How did she come to understand the importance of education? It wasn't something that she had much experience with herself, but somehow she understood its value. And she raised her children to, she sort of constantly said to them, education is important. I want you to get an education. That's how you're going to have opportunities. And in some ways, Granny sort of continued to be disappointed with the opportunities that she was able to provide for her children. The family struggled a lot, having sort of 7 children to feed and not a lot of resources to do it. Her first children left school, 3rd grade, 5th grade, 7th grade. Her first daughter, my Aunt Ruth, was able to get all the way to high school, which was so close, but then she got very ill and she wasn't able to finish, and the family needed her to help out on the farm after that. And so Granny sort of consistently, she tried to carve out the space for education and for opportunities, and just the circumstances they found themselves in, she sort of wasn't able to give her children the opportunities that she wanted to. But my mom was the 6th of those 7 children, and in some ways the one that was listening to Granny the most. My mom was sort of the one that helped her out in the house, because daughters tended to do more of the sort of housework while the sons were out in the field. And so my mom, Granny, had a big impact on her, a big influence on her. And she sort of listened to this idea of education as the thing that you need to prioritize above all else. And so my mom was the first of Granny's kids to graduate high school. And she went on to go to Berea College, which was quite frankly unheard of for sort of the holler that she found herself in. This was a place where family was really important. It's still really important. Community was really important. The sense of connection to the land and to each other. And I think that's a really powerful thing. I don't mean to ever discount the importance of community. And I think people can make legitimate choices to stay close to family, close to the place they feel connected to. And that was sort of the expectation there at the time. And so my mom sort of broke the mold, and she went to Berea College, and that really set our entire branch of the family on a path that was different from the rest of my relatives, and that would culminate in me having the opportunities that I was talking about at the beginning of my time with you. And so my mom went to Berea. Even though it's a small town, about 10,000 people, I think, she thought it was the equivalent of New York City. You might as well have set her down in the middle of Beijing as far as she was concerned. She was afraid to leave her dorm room at first because although it's sort of a 2 square block area that she would have had to travel, she was convinced she was going to get lost, that there were too many people. She'd never find her way back to her dorm room. How would she ever get to class? This was just too much for her to handle. But over time, she adjusted, adapted, came to really appreciate her time at Berea. And she met my dad when she was a freshman. They got engaged after her freshman year of college. They got married, and because having a family was what my mom knew, that was sort of what she had been raised to value, they had me when my mom was a sophomore in college and my dad was a senior. And I can't imagine, reflecting on sort of my college experience, how busy it was, all the things, the ways that I was sort of prioritizing myself and my learning and my growing, to have added an infant and eventually a toddler into that mix. But my mom sort of managed to find a way to balance motherhood with completing her education, and it took her a while. She sort of took some time off with me. She went part-time, but I grew up watching my mom finish her education and finish her degree. And I remember one of my earliest memories is whenever she graduated from Berea College, and in some ways it was an event for our entire family. We had all been a part of helping make sure that my mom had graduated. We had all been a part of her educational journey. And so I remember getting a little matching cap and gown and getting to walk with her across the stage and sort of down the procession and be a part of this experience with her. And it was in some ways symbolic, I think, of the way that, one, her getting an education had sort of opened up opportunities for all of us, and also sort of the way that directly her degree would give me opportunities for myself. And so Hill Women sort of traces that story of Granny to my mom to me, and how it was these women who struggled, worked really hard, did really hard things that allowed me to go from being born into that trailer where we couldn't afford to turn the window AC unit on because it was too expensive, to going to some really great educational institutions and having really the opportunity to choose what I wanted to do in the world. And it turns out that what I wanted to do in the world was pay forward the opportunities that I had been given, because I truly believe in my heart of hearts, my gut of guts, that when you are the recipient of opportunities from a community, and that people have sacrificed to give you opportunities. And that's my granny, that's my mom, that's my Aunt Ruth, my mom's older sister, that a lot of people who have read the book, they say, Aunt Ruth is the real hero of the book. She's the one that, she got so close to being able to go to college herself. She desperately wanted to, and then because she got ill and because the family needed her, her dreams were sort of taken away from her. But she got to work on the farm. She helped the family out. She helped make sure that my mom had the opportunity to go to college. When my mom started second guessing, if she actually wanted to go, Aunt Ruth was the one that said, "You're going to college because I didn't get the chance to go to college." So my Aunt Ruth is a very stern woman, and you can tell when she means business. And she was like, "You're going, and there's no arguing about it. You're going to get in that truck. You're going to drive to Berea. And by the way, here's some money. It's everything that I have saved up working on farms this entire summer. It's going to help you buy your books. So stop crying, stop whining, go get your education. You're doing this for me as well as yourself. And so all of these women, and not just women, all of these, I grew up getting food stamps and Medicaid and all of these supportive government programs. And so a lot of things went into giving me opportunities. And I think once you recognize that, once you sort of realize the way that the opportunities that you have in life are not because of things you did, but because of other choices other people have made, policymakers, family members, community members, the way that those choices have shaped the opportunities that are available to you. For me, I felt morally compelled to pay those opportunities forward, to sort of try to create other opportunities for other people. And so that's how I ended up back in Kentucky, working as a legal aid attorney to help low-income domestic violence survivors in rural Kentucky be able to get free legal representation. And so I did that through the Louisville Legal Aid Society. I know we have some folks from the law school who are tuning in today. And if anyone ever wants to talk about why I believe that legal services are so important, and why I think in particular sort of legal services to women are so important, I am really happy to have that conversation, and I'll make sure that everyone has my contact information today. And so I want to sort of touch on a few things that I think are important in telling this narrative, this idea of talking about my granny, my Aunt Ruth, my mom, talking about how that fed into my life and how that led to me going to Yale and Harvard and then coming back to work with low-income women in the state of Kentucky, sort of the women that in many ways are like the ones that created the opportunities for me. The first thing I kind of touched on at the outset is the idea that I think of this as what I call the anti-bootstraps narrative, because I think too often we talk about this idea of put on your boots, hoist yourself up by your bootstraps, and that's how change happens. And that is antithetical to everything that I have experienced. And I started to write Hill Women in 2016 after the election of Donald Trump led a lot of people to be interested in Appalachia. There's this idea of it's a place with a lot of poverty. It's a place that voted overwhelmingly in favor of Donald Trump. It's a place we don't understand. It's a place we don't see a lot. This sort of idea of the mountains blocking it off from the rest of the world and people sort of living in communities that are tucked away from our view a lot of times. And so people started to be interested in Appalachia, and they started to be interested in stories coming out of there. And there was one, we might as well address what this one is. This little book called Hillbilly Elegy, some of you all might have heard about. And it told the story of, purported to tell the story of Appalachia. And it became the one thing, the one voice, the one narrative that a lot of people knew of Appalachia. They thought that that was the voice of the region. And I read it and I disagreed with it. And I thought that the way that it framed the people and the problems was really just against everything that I knew from my experience. And so I think sometimes you don't know you have a story worth telling until you see someone else telling a similar story. On the surface, my story looks a lot like that's told in Hillbilly Elegy. But the sort of meaning that of the arc, the sort of way that we have experienced and the things we've taken from our journeys are very, very different. And so that was the first time that I realized maybe people would be interested in reading my story. I believe that the way that I want to talk about these things is different and important, and that we need sort of another voice and another frame when we talk about people coming from low-income Appalachian communities and sort of having opportunities that come out of that. And just to be clear, I never fault anyone for telling their story. Here in a minute, I'm going to explicitly talk about why I believe that stories are the way that the world changes. And I think everyone has a story worth telling, and we should be encouraging everyone to tell their personal truth. At the same time, I think whenever you sort of cross the bridge from telling your story into adding a moral dimension, sort of talking about policies, talking about sort of moral shortcomings of people in an area. I think that that's a different thing that we're talking about, and that's not just telling your story anymore. And I'd be happy to, if anyone has questions in particular with some of the things that I think hillbilly elegy does that do a disservice to Appalachia, I'm happy to talk about those during the question and answer portion. So I know that a lot of times we can have a really robust disagreement, but have a really good conversation about hillbilly elegy in particular. And that leads into the next point that I want to make, which is that the stories that we tell about struggling communities matter. The way that we talk about areas that struggle, it matters. The voices that we lift up, that matters. And I think it matters particularly in Appalachia because it's an area that people don't know a lot about. People who don't have a tie there, who don't have a family member from there. It's not a place that a lot of the rest of America sort of travels to. And it is geographically isolated. The mountains make it hard to get to it. And it's a place where a lot of times all we know about it are the stories that we tell. And I think that this isn't unique to Appalachia. I think a lot of times we talk about struggling communities, we tell these stories, and it creates this sense of othering sometimes. I think when we tell stories in a particular way that focus on, this idea that there are moral shortcomings of people there, or that everything is so broken and so dirty and so hopeless, and oh my goodness, these poor people who are living in poverty, it creates this idea that these are communities that need outsiders to come in and save them, and that other people need to be doing the work to make Appalachia a better place for folks to live. And I think that that's a really harmful idea, regardless of what type of struggling community we're talking about. For me, when I talk about Appalachia, there are good, smart, creative, gritty people who are doing work in Appalachia. And what we need to be doing is asking the question of how we elevate those leaders and how we elevate those voices and how we give them the resources that they need to move forward. I want to just point out that as our city is celebrating or sort of celebrating the life of Breonna Taylor, marking the tragic killing of her 1 year ago, and talking about the work that we still need to do to make sure that our Black communities have opportunities, equity, that we're sort of moving forward in the direction that we need to. It's really important that as we address these struggles and as we talk about them, that we are elevating voices of groups in these communities, voices that are impacted by these problems. I think anytime that you have people outside of a community trying to swoop in and save a community, that's a really, really harmful thing, and that's something that we should avoid doing. And so I think in Appalachia, it's true. I think when we talk about our Black community here in Louisville and all the disparities that we have in our city, it's important to find leadership of that impacted group and elevate those voices and strive to be an ally and listen to people tell you what that means. And so in my experience, a lot of times people will ask me, what can I do to help Appalachia? What can I do to move Appalachia forward? And what I tell them is support the leaders that are there, support a lot of those leaders in my experience are women, support them doing the work. They don't sort of need outsiders to swoop in. They are plenty smart, plenty capable. What they really need are resources, and they need allies. And I'm happy to get into that more in the question and answer session as well. And so the last thing that I want to talk about is why I think stories change the world, why I think storytelling is important, and why I think that it's something that we need to be encouraging folks to do. I believe that policy is important, data is important, it's all part of the package, but stories are what resonate with people. That's why I wrote a book of stories talking about individual people. I think it gives people something to sort of hang on to, hang their hat on, it sticks with them in a way that the numbers and the statistics don't. That's based on my own experience working in legal services, and I think that being a lawyer is at its core being a good storyteller. But I've also seen the importance of storytelling play out in other ways as well, in sort of policy arenas. And so I want to talk briefly about one story from the book, which is how Jeanette's Law came to be passed. Jeanette was one of my clients at Legal Aid. She was a woman who had suffered really horrific physical violence at the hands of her abusive spouse for years. And eventually, in 2017, there was an assault that he not only assaulted her, he assaulted their child. And for her, that was what it took for her to finally say, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm ready to leave. Just to sort of understand the context of that assault, her husband actually pointed a loaded gun at her, pulled the trigger, and the bullet actually ripped through Jeanette's clothing. It came so close to hitting her, and her clothes are still in police custody. And after that assault, he fled and drained their bank account. Jeanette came to me at Legal Services because she couldn't afford an attorney. She was ready to move forward with her life, but she didn't have the resources to hire an attorney. And so I represented her for free. And there was this quirk in Kentucky law at the time where anyone who was incarcerated had to be appointed an attorney before a court could enter any sort of judgment against them. And a divorce is technically a judgment entered by a court. And I want to be clear, I think incarcerated folks should have attorneys. I think that people should have attorneys in general. I believe that vulnerable folks need representation. So my underlying qualm is not with that concept. My underlying issue is with who had to pay for that attorney. And under Kentucky law, it was Jeanette. It was anyone who wanted to file for divorce had to be the person that would pay those legal fees. And although Jeanette, at one point, I think she had $16 in her bank account, couldn't afford an attorney, which is why I was representing her. The court system told her that she had to cobble together the money that she really didn't have to be able to pay for her abusive husband's attorney's fees in this divorce. And seeing the way that it made her feel like the law re-victimized her and prioritized his needs over hers and was a system that was working for him and not for her, it was heartbreaking. Our court systems should be something that people feel, protects them, provides justice. We know that so often it doesn't, but it's something that we should be striving for. And when we find these rules that really just re-victimize folks, we need to be changing them. And so I went to Jeanette and I said, do you want to change this law with me? I've seen this play out in other cases. I know that you understand that this has been something that has powerfully impacted you. Do you want to try to change it? And she said yes. At first she said, I'm not sure, but then she said yes. And she went and she testified before the House and the Senate. She told her story to the media. She talked openly about things that a lot of people still feel a lot of guilt and shame to talk openly about. She showed pictures of her bruises and her injuries on television, and she answered any question that people asked her about really personal things. And sort of having that story, having this person who had been so directly and horribly impacted by this unjust system and this unjust law started to get folks' attention, and it started to create momentum. And before you knew it, it sort of the law that had her name on it, Jeanette's Law, passed overwhelmingly through both chambers of the Kentucky State House and went on to be signed into law by the governor. And so the last passage that I want to read from Hill Women is just a little paragraph about Jeanette's Law and about sort of how I think about Jeanette's Law in the context of larger change, because although this was one small thing, it was one tangible thing and one way that we were able to make the system better. So for those of you who have a book, I'm on page 239 and sort of at the bottom of that page. But each small win is just that, a win. And each win is a reminder that things can change. These wins are also a reminder that people who have been victimized, be it by a spouse or an unjust system, are nonetheless powerful. Some people portray survivors of domestic violence as weak. Some people portray the women in Appalachia the same way. I think Jeanette's story illustrates the opposite. When given the right tools, support, and environment, these women are capable of changing the world. And so that, my experience with Jeanette, my experience in writing a book now, just reinforces to me that stories are the way that the world changes. And that's part of the reason I'm so glad to be here with you all today to talk about stories, to talk about books, to talk about women writing books. It's a real honor to have this opportunity and this time with you all. And with that, I will stop talking at you all and very much am looking forward to having a conversation and taking your all's questions. So I'm not sure if I'm going to be getting these in the chat or if I think we have a moderator coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cassie. So let's start some love in the chat. You can put a thumbs up, a heart, whatever you want. So hello, I'm Miranda Massman, Vice President of Women for Women Student Board. So that's a student group organization under the Women's Center, and I'll be the moderator for the Q&A session. So please put any questions in the chat, and so we may not be able to answer all the questions, but we will try to get through as many as we can. So first, we're going to start with some questions that were already submitted from the audience. So first up, how do you keep your spark as an artist, Cassie?
For me, and I think that it's a constant struggle. I have 2 kids under 2. I'm a visiting professor. I'm on Metro Council. I'm working on a second book. All of these sorts of things, life can get very, very busy. And I will tell you, I used to, when people would say, I'm so busy, I haven't had time to respond to your text message. I used to be like, who doesn't have time to respond to a text message? Now I understand that there are some times you don't have time to respond to a text message. But I really believe that you are of no good to anyone else in your life. You can't I can't be the mom, the friend, the family member, the artist, the policymaker, the teacher, any of those things I want to be if I'm not sort of carving out a little bit of time to myself to make sure that I'm checking in with myself, to sort of have that little bit of time every day to just be, relax, exist, sort of see how I'm feeling and have that time to myself. For me, I feel that sense of ease and that sort of sense of calm whenever I'm out in nature. I think it goes back to growing up on a farm. I really love to, be outdoors and see trees and see nature. And I'm lucky that I live close enough to several parks that you will almost always find me walking in the park or jogging or out with my dog. And whenever I was writing Hill Women, I actually had almost every single day I would write, I would hit this block where I was like, I just don't know what to say anymore. I just feel stuck, and I would go on a walk. I would maybe talk to a friend on the phone while I was walking. And psychologists talk about this back burner idea that even whenever you're sort of not actively working, if there's a problem your brain's mulling over, it puts it on the back burner and keeps working on it even when you're not aware of it. And so a lot of times at the end of that walk, I would go back to my computer and I would be like, I know how I'm going to tell this story. And so I'm a big believer in taking that time for self-care and making sure that you're carving out space for yourself.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so how has your life changed for you since the book's publication?
You know, I think the one thing that has been really cool to see is I wrote about the Hill women in my life. I told the stories of these incredible, strong women I know. And almost every time that I do an event, there is someone who comes up to me and says, let me tell you about, my Aunt Sally. And she was the first woman to go to medical school, and then she went and she did this or that or this other thing. And there are so many strong Hill women out there, and a lot of their stories haven't been told. And that's one of the things that I want to focus on for a next project, is this idea of how do we elevate those other stories of those other women, because there's so many of them out there that are just so impressive. And it's made me realize just how many truly strong, incredible women there are in Appalachia and really in sort of struggling communities throughout America.
Awesome. Okay. So you mentioned writing your second book. So is that going to be the general topic of your next work?
My second book is actually around this idea of sort of motherhood, how we value moms in society. I have 2 kids under 2. I have a lot of conversations with my friends who are, state representatives or in other elected offices about how a lot of times women will participate in decision-making processes and decision-making bodies, either before they have children or once their children are of a certain age. Yet we see women sort of step back from these public-facing roles whenever they have young children. And we know that regardless of what other identity someone might wear, motherhood is associated with what's called the motherhood penalty in terms of earning lower wages. Even if you were part of a group that already earned lower wages, motherhood sort of adds an additional penalty to that. And also in terms of representation in elected office, it adds another layer to that. And so I think it's really interesting. We have more former prosecutors in the United States Congress than we do women with children younger than teenage, which is just an interesting statistic. And so my next book is talking about this idea of public mothering, this idea that sort of moms of all types, Black, brown, LGBTQ, whatever sort of other identity you might have, motherhood is sort of missing from the decision-making conversation. So how do we change that? And why does that matter? Why is that an important thing?
Okay, so we're going to ask a question from the chat. So do you feel marginalized as an educated Appalachian when you return back to the Appalachia region?
It was interesting. I hadn't even thought about, in my mind, whenever I finished Harvard and I was like, I'm moving back to Kentucky, I'm so excited about it. I sort of hadn't realized how much everyone else had changed, how much the community had changed, how my friends had changed, and their lives were different. And there had been a long period of time between whenever I had been a part of that community and whenever I went away and then whenever I returned. And so in the book, I describe it as sort of, I had thought that I could just plug back into the puzzle, like sort of the missing piece, but everything had changed whenever I got back. And so my experience and my choices to go and be outside of the community, in some ways, I'm still not of the community in the same way that I was. Sort of other people have been a part of it. They've learned and grown and gone through things, and I missed out on all of that. And so it's not that I ever feel ostracized because I got education. I think a lot of people recognize that it's given me opportunities, but it also has made me feel like I'm not as much a part of the community that I came from. And that's why I really stress to folks, I think people can make legitimate choices to want to be a part of their community, their family. Smart people live in small towns. I think there's this idea sometimes that anyone who could leave Appalachia would leave Appalachia. And so there's this idea that people that don't are the ones who were left behind. And, I think that's really harmful. I've had people ask me, well, why doesn't everyone just move to cities then if it's so hard to live in Appalachia and if these small towns are struggling so much? And I really push back on that. I think that's a really harmful idea because I think connection to the land, connection to family, there's so much to value in these communities. And what we should be doing is providing resources and tools and systems so that folks who want to live in those communities can do so and have the opportunity to leave if they want. But if they choose to live there, that we should make sure that they sort of have what they need to thrive.
Okay, all right. And then another question from the chat. Is your commitment to education what led you to your position at Brandeis? And do you feel like you're fulfilling your matriarch's passion for education by educating others?
Ooh, I love that question. Yeah, I do. I think I've only recently come to see how all of the dots have connected, but I love teaching. I love being a part of a system that, I think you educate people, you give them tools that makes a tangible difference in the world. In particular, I like sort of being able to bring my experience as a legal services attorney into the classroom and sort of talk concretely about, I try to encourage folks to not just accept the legal systems that exist as sort of the way everything has to be, but to really think critically about how the law reflects our values and our policy choices and how, we could change it, how we could sort of pick different values and different policy choices. And so I'm hopeful that sort of being able to help encourage people to think that way and think creatively about these systems. I think that that's how you inspire folks to change things for the better.
All right, very good answer, very good. Okay, with it being Women's History Month, who is an inspiring woman author to you?
Ooh, that's going to be hard. In terms of picking just one, one thing that's been really interesting to me is to sort of be becoming a part of the idea of Appalachian literature. So I never thought of myself as a writer. I never thought that I was going to write a book. I never thought that, anything I did would be a part of this really robust sort of system of Appalachian women writers, and that I would get to be in conversation with them. But I just recently did a panel with a woman named Lee Smith, who's sort of the godmother of Appalachian literature. And she had read Hill Women, which blew my mind. The fact that Lee Smith, who's been sort of this foundational figure in Appalachian writing, had read my book and had nice things to say about it, just blew my mind. And so I think that I'm going to duck on calling out any particular writer, just to say that the opportunity to interact with so many great women Appalachian writers has been a real privilege, and to get to feel like they're welcoming me and including me as part of the conversation. It's a really kind community.
Very, very good answer. Okay, so another question from the chat. So it says, for the vast majority of your book, you really do a great job of appealing to both sides of the political aisle. At the end, though, you make what feels like an abrupt shift to a very left-forward stance. So what drove you to that decision?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we went back and forth all the time at sort of an editorial level. I will say, just a plug for anyone who wants to write a book, if it is at all autobiographical or memoir focused, get yourself a good editor, because your editor is almost like a therapist. They're asking you questions. Why did you make these choices? Can we dig a little deeper here? Let's really peel back below the surface and analyze what was happening. And so I was lucky that I had just an incredible editor to work with. And she was as much a part of shaping the book as I was in writing it. And a lot of people, I think they don't realize that sort of the importance of having your editor who is an ally and an advocate, and someone that you genuinely enjoy their company, because you're going to be spending a lot of time with them. And we talked a lot about politics, and to what extent bringing up politics at all was something we wanted to do or not do. I have family members who disagree with everything I think politically. We are complete opposites in every single way, and we have respectful, thoughtful conversations about policy issues. And one thing that I tell people a lot is that if you get past sort of the surface level and starting the conversation from this idea that the other side is the enemy, and you actually, instead of using sort of the loaded language that we so often use, you actually sit and you talk about ideas and you talk about problems. I have realized that most people aren't as far away on things as you might think. And so for me, it was important to include some of my political journey and political experience, because I think that politics, it's a very real thing that is part of the conversation about how you pass policies, how you change systems, how you help struggling communities. And I also wanted to just talk a little bit about my experience of being a Democrat on the left side of the political spectrum and going and having conversations with people from sort of the heart of Donald Trump country, because I think that that's something that not enough people do and have experienced, that increasingly we hear all about how we're all in our own bubbles and in our own silos. I will say at the beginning, I alluded to how you get nasty emails as a writer. That is the point that I get the most nasty emails about, because politics is just such a hot button for people. And I hope that Hill Women is part of finding consensus amongst people with differing views. Sometimes I get emails that let me know that that is not how people have perceived it. But I believe that the world is better if we all tell stories, we all sit down, we all try to find common ground.
Very, very well said. Okay, I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. So in the chat, it says, do you have advice for women who wish to publish a book of memoirs? And do you want to talk a little bit about your road to publication?
Yeah, so I had, in some ways, a pretty atypical road. I believe that this is why women helping other women is a great and powerful thing. I had lunch one day with someone who was in Kentucky, sort of just for a short period of time. She used to host a television show, and so she had this fancy New York agency, and we were talking about Hillbilly Elegy that we had both just read. And I was sort of talking about my issues with it. I was really sort of hot and riled up and can you believe and she was like, well, if instead of complaining about it, why don't you write a counter narrative? Why don't you tell your story? If you think that that's not your story, then no one's telling your story for you. Go write a book. And I was like, oh, I don't know how to write a book. I'm not a writer. I don't know how to do that. And she was like, well, I have an agent. I can connect you. And I believe that when doors open and opportunities present themselves, you jump on them, and that's what I did. Sort of it happened from there. I will say with the second book, it's been a little more of the traditional publication process of developing a proposal. And I truly think that everyone has a story worth telling. It's about thinking strategically and critically about what the right platform for that is. And if you're going to reach out to editors for something that's memoir-based or autobiographical, look for someone that, all the editors, you can kind of get information about them. Find someone that shares your interests. Same thing if you're looking for agents. Look for someone who's your story is going to resonate with. It's going to really be a champion for it. And sort of put a team around you that cares about what you're writing about as much as you care about it. Those are going to be the people that are going to want to help magnify your voice and get your story out there. Don't just sort of be looking for the biggest name agent, the biggest publishing house. Really sort of try to find people that have an interest in elevating and sharing your story. Those are going to be the people that will give you the platform to do so, and they're going to be the people that are going to help make sure you tell your story in sort of the most impactful way possible.
Very good advice. I want to thank you for your time. I really appreciate you answering all the questions that we've had. And I'd love to thank the audience for all of your questions. Let's show Cassie and the audience just a little bit more love in the chat. So now we're going to be hearing from the authors of the Louisville Story Programs, The Fights We Fought Have Brought Us Here. It is my pleasure to introduce Joe Manning, Deputy Director of the Louisville Story Program.
Okay, I think I should be on camera and you should be able to hear me. Is that the case, everybody? Halima, can you see me? Yeah, okay, looks good. All right, well, I'm going to jump right in. First, let me say what an honor it is for Louisville Story Program and the authors of The Fights We Fought Have Brought Us Here to be here today with you all, and in such august company, of course, as Councilwoman Armstrong. That was a remarkable presentation, Councilwoman, and really well met. Some of the things you covered are, I think, some of the most critically important issues that face us right now as a community and as a culture, frankly. The rural-urban divide is, I think, a much underrepresented, underplayed issue between us all right now. And so I was so thrilled and engaged to hear you discussing your experiences. It's a fantastic story. I'd love to hear more about it sometime, and of course read the book. Folks, what I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about the Louisville Story Program, and then as soon as possible stop flapping my gums and sort of turn it over to the stars of our presentation, the authors of The Fights We Fought Have Brought Us Here. But for those who don't know, well, I'm the Deputy Director of the Louisville Story Program. We're a literary arts outreach nonprofit here in Louisville. And our mission, our aim is to partner closely with folks in our community who we don't hear from often enough, traditionally underrepresented communities, and provide opportunities and platforms necessary for them to write and publish books about their own experiences. In the main, these are books, anthologies of nonfiction, that are written in two ways. The most germane to this discussion is we partner closely with schools here in Louisville and provide extremely rigorous, in-depth college-level creative writing workshops, 2 semesters long, and these programs last about 18 months on average. Since 2014, we published 8 books, 4 youth books. Our authors are paid for their participation. They're given an advance on royalties, and it's a critically important part of our mission. This type of remuneration sort of signifies our commitment to collaboration and to avoiding any sort of whiff of extractive sort of industry. Since that time, since our first book, we have ushered 116 new voices into the world, and our authors have been paid $60,000 in advances on royalties, honoraria, speaking fees, and the like. I think I'll skip talking about our community book projects, which are conducted a little bit differently than our youth projects, but just briefly, those books, like the one we published on the backside of Churchill Downs recently, are conducted as sort of collaborative ethnographies with multiple folks in a community who are given authorship of their stories through doing oral history interviews and collaborating on the editing over time. But let me tell you a little bit more about the fights we fought who brought us here, which is our latest youth project, and a real stunner of a book, and I couldn't be more proud of the authors who published it. We partnered with Central High School and Ann Walsh and Principal Green late 2018 and the school year of 2019 to start another book writing project. 2 semesters long, 4-credit college level creative writing workshop focusing on memoir and fiction and oral history. We never know what we're going to get into when we start a book writing project. Our goal is to provide an environment in which the authors feel liberated to say their piece in a very safe workshop environment. We cover the nuts and bolts of creative writing in the first stage, how to write with a lot of detail and significant sort of introspection. This, I think, is one of the main thrusts of our workshop, is to invite the authors to dig deep, interrogate their experiences, and then feel liberated to write about them at length. At that point, we work with them one-on-one, very closely, to start the revision and editing process. And in this way, our programming is, I think, one of the most rigorous creative writing programs probably in America, if I'm to be honest. These authors do more editing and revision than they have ever bargained for, and it's hard work. And they'll tell you that, I'm sure, later. Of course, what happened at Central this year was definitely different from any other project, in that after 75 workshops, it all dried up. And between a global pandemic and one of the most significant civil rights uprisings in American history, we were not able to meet in person anymore. Of course, COVID was the reason we weren't able to meet in person. So the second half of the book project took place at a distance. I won't lie, there were about 2 weeks this time last year when I was not sure how we were going to get through the publication, how to meet our deadline. But the resolve of these 10 authors, as I probably will say over and over today, and as I've said to them 1,000 times, was absolutely humbling. They wanted to write this book, and they had put in so much work that they just would not be stopped. So, you know, there was, as there always is in these projects, there's a lot of back and forth. Sometimes you got to call somebody 2 or 3 times or hit them up by text, get them on a video call to continue this really important and very difficult revision and editing process. And they did it. They worked into the summer, so that's 2 semesters plus an entire summer of writing and revision over and over to create the type of engaging and compelling nonfiction that we want to offer the world and that we expect them to produce because their stories are so valuable and because we feel like to invest that much time and energy into expressing their experiences and describing their communities is the right way to honor those communities and to honor their own experiences. And then in October, we finally were able to put out the book, The Fights We Fought Have Brought Us Here. As I say, you never really know what the sort of binding element of one of these books is going to be until way past halfway. What came up in the workshop was pretty much uniformly a desire on the part of the authors to really dig deep and talk about some tough stuff. And there are some very frank and gritty and courageous stories in this book. And we'll hear some of them today. So I'm truly humbled to have been able to work with these authors, and I can't say enough how important I think these stories are, echoing some of the things that Councilwoman Armstrong said about sort of dignifying people by listening to their accounts, listening to their stories, and practicing what I call deep listening, really trying to sort of dissolve our own perceptions and ego long enough to really hear where people are coming from. So I hope we can do some of that today, and I'm happy to take questions later about LSP. I think Jamaica is going to play a short promotional video that we made as we were rolling out the book. Jamaica, can we see that video? Is that possible? Oh, I think maybe I need to do something here, guys. Let's see. Well, you know what? I'll put a link in the chat for the video, which we can have a look at later. So in the meantime, I would like to just go ahead and turn over the floor to the authors, who are one at a time going to read excerpts of their chapters. They're going to tell you their names and the title of their chapters, and then read a short excerpt. And then we'll have a sort of brief, we'll hear them unpack a little bit about their process and about their chapter. Then I'll lob some softballs at them. And later on, we will have a Q&A after a panel discussion with them. Okay, so I'd like to introduce my friend Persia Archie Smith, who is going to read from her chapter. Hi, Persia.
Hi, Joe. So my chapter is called Routine Checkup Blues, and I'm going to be reading a little excerpt from it. A doctor's appointment. That's all it was supposed to be. Then I could go home from a long and tiring day. But no, I ended up in the hospital, trapped and traumatized, all because of a stupid, simple routine checkup. I expected my doctor to just say the usual. Get your health together, eat better, do more exercise, blah, blah, blah. Instead, she said she was worried about me and advised me to go to the emergency room for a mental evaluation. All I felt was anger. Why do I need an evaluation? I thought, okay, so I have suicidal thoughts. Big whoop. I'm not going to do anything. Maybe a few months ago, but I'm different now, I swear. My depression developed when I was in the 5th grade, when I started losing friends and felt like I couldn't trust anyone. I remember looking at my old friends' social media and seeing them hang out with new people. And I started to think they were trying to replace me. That's when the feeling started, that people didn't need me anymore. It was a scary time. I didn't want anyone in my life to know that I was depressed. And not talking about it meant that I sank deeper and deeper into my head. I tried therapy and medicine and stopped both, which then messed up my mental and chemical balance more. I began to feel depressed, suicidal, and angry. I could always tell when I was about to have a breakdown if I was paying attention. I would get cold and even get goosebumps. I felt myself moving back into a dark space, like I'm moving behind a curtain. I know this feeling isn't uncommon in our society, but I still feel alone. That night, we went to Kozer's Children's Hospital for an evaluation. In the waiting room, my mom sat in a chair with tears in her eyes. Don't cry, because you're gonna make me cry. I said as tears started to form in my eyes too. I realized how painful it was for her. I wanted to change and get better so much so I wouldn't keep seeing my family hurt and worried about me. I saw this tweet that once said, "Do you ever realize that you're a lot more traumatized than you know?" I keep that in my mind anytime something happens that brings up some kind of negative feelings or little flashbacks from me and my mom. We all have memories and trauma that haven't been dealt with, and I could tell this was one of those times. Growing up, my mom found herself in situations that weren't the best, seeing things that a child shouldn't have to, and growing up early. She's always told me stories since I was too young to remember. My birth was a wake up call to most in my family. My mom used to tell me I was a blessing because had I not been born, she probably would have gone down a destructive path herself. I think my birth helped out my Nana too. I used to stay with her a lot, and she taught me, and in the process, she learned something too. My Nana used to have trouble reading, and when she would read books to me, if she came across the word that she needed help with, I was able to help her. I never really thought my life would really mean that much to other people, but it obviously means more than what I thought. My family is good medicine for me too, though. There's a hilarious group of people with amazing sense of humor. I always loved laughing growing up. It was as if everything was about smiling. My Nana is so outgoing and confident. She can make anybody laugh. And the behavior is just so contagious, passing down to my mom and me till we're laughing on the floor, coughing till our chests hurt. It's just an everyday thing for us. And it's good therapy. Maybe that's why I was so happy all the time growing up. My family was all around me. The open space and all the people in the waiting area at Kozer had my anxiety up. I tried to distract myself and keep my mind off things by watching people in the waiting room. There were cute little kids running around being annoying, and a woman gathered them around a fish tank to keep them focused a little bit. "This is RJ," and the lady pointed to different fish. "And this is AJ, and CJ, and DJ. And oh, this one? This one is PJ. This one's AJ?" one of the kids asked, pointing to a random fish. "Yeah," said the lady, going along with whatever her kid was saying. She looked back at the other parents and shrugged. I was trying my hardest not to stare at people in the waiting room because I know how rude and uncomfortable it can be. I saw a father and a teenage daughter who looked so sad, and the entire time I never saw her pull out a phone or look at anything. She just sat there thinking, trying to calm down. She and I kept giving each other glances. She looked like someone who had just been given hard news. I wanted to go sit down next to her and talk, to figure out what was wrong, but I didn't have the courage for that. She was wearing a medical band and looked red in the face, as if she'd been crying. I know that look. I've been so emotional lately that it was getting hard to fight the tears. Water just does whatever it wants. So first off, I want to say thank you for having me here. But I wanted to talk about my chapter a little bit and what it means to me. And mostly with my chapter, I mostly just want to get across how important mental health is, because a lot of people in our society don't even realize that people around them or even themselves are dealing with something mentally and how much it affects them. And even like the people around me, like once this was published and they read my chapter, they didn't even realize that I was going through these things. And I think it's just so important that we talk to our loved ones and at least just have a discussion to see how they're truly doing instead of just like a passing by, like, how are you? And it's like so important to me, even though during this time of when I was writing the chapter, it was actually very hard for me to open up because I'll talk about my depression and anxiety, but usually I don't talk about the deep feelings, like how I feel suicidal sometimes. Like, I barely ever talked about that with my mom, and she's like the closest person to me. And so, even though it was very hard and tough for me to open up and write about this chapter, I'm glad that I did, because at least if I can get the message across about how important it is to at least one or like a few people, then that's all that matters. And I'll feel at least a little bit better that I opened up.
I hear that, Persia. Can you hear me right now?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. Just as always, I'm just sort of blown away by the way that you're able to, in that excerpt and in that chapter, talk about such sort of personal and intimate experiences and present it in a way that is so relevant and applicable and engaging to the reader. It's such a puzzling and sort of intense chapter to have read as a reader and also worked with you on. I want to sort of ask you to elaborate a little bit further on the process of how you managed to do that work, which was so vulnerable, and also to ask about, well, let me just ask you that, beyond hoping that this chapter will reach someone out there who needs to read it, and beyond sort of elaborating on your story for the benefit of others, could you talk about the writing process for you and how that affected you as you were struggling with these ideas and issues?
So what's so funny about that is at the beginning when the program actually started, I generally believed I had nothing to write about. And in September of 2019, which was like 2 months into us actually starting to write, I ended up having the evaluation and I just wanted to write about it. But um, being that I didn't really, I guess, wanted to open up, it was very hard and difficult for me. But also being that I had prior knowledge of writing, which was really good and very good for writing this chapter. But I guess it wasn't hard. I know I sound all over the place right
You're
now.
great.
But I don't know. It was kind of emotional, but also kind of easy to let that guard down, to
Yeah.
just write and just, especially when we had times that you would tell us just write whatever and just keep writing, just don't think about it, just let your thoughts be on the page. And
Right.
I would just do that at times, and it just made it so much easier for the writing process.
Yeah, and Persia brings up, I think, a really important part about the way that we run a workshop, which is that the first stage of the workshop, and this I hope will be interesting to the writers out there in the audience, is to engage in what I call incautious writing. Everybody gets a prompt, and these are timed writing exercises, and the exercise itself is one in overcoming the internal editor. I say kick the editor off of your shoulder for 5 minutes, for 10 minutes, and write as fast as you can, put as many words on the page, try to keep your pen moving without stopping. If you can do that for 5 minutes, then you have succeeded in the task. Subsequently, I find as a writer and in my time in workshops that what gets uncovered in that exercise is is just gold. And really every book that we published with young authors at Louisville Story Program begins with this process of incautious writing. That's where you shake loose what's going on inside and feel liberated to, talk on the page about what's happening. And it's still so remarkable to me that Persia was writing in real time about what she experienced. Another bit of sort of writerly dazzle that happens in your chapter, Persia, is your power of observation. I think that scene that you wrote in the waiting room with just you as the narrator are just training your gaze all around the room, watching the world happen, watching people experience their lives in trying situations. And the details that you uncovered were just remarkable. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that power of observation that you employ in this chapter.
Yeah, so what's so interesting about that is when I become very anxious, I become more aware and I try to like observe my surroundings just to get my mind off things. And it's so funny because during that time, like after the book came out and my mom had read it, she was like, I don't remember any of this. Like, I barely remember seeing the kids and barely remember seeing the girl. And it's just because, like, with her anxiety, she's just so focused on what's happening, like, what's going to happen, more so as me just trying to forget about it. And so, but I think that's like a really good thing that I have because it was very easy when it came to writing the scenery and what was going on in the chapter.
Yeah, I just love it. I mean, especially the way that the camera, as I always say, ends up on this other girl across the room. There's this wordless communion that happens between the two characters on the page that I think as a writer is not easy to pull off. I think it's just expertly handled. I adore that part. Another thing, can you talk a little bit about, it may not have come through in this excerpt specifically, but there's a humor that underlies your chapter that I've just been totally dazzled by the whole time. You just have this, I don't know, it's something about your observation, something about the way that you introspect. Persia's chapter sort of moves back from scene into internal reflection, back and forth. It's propelled that way. Do you think of your chapter as being like having funny parts, and do you recognize it as an author as being funny sometimes?
Yeah, it's more so just like when I was writing, I would just think of this something in my head, like just as something sarcastic, and then I would just write it down, and then I guess I'm just naturally funny, and so it just comes off as that way in the chapter. But
I
yeah.
agree. One last question. Can you talk about, this is just to reflect on what's it like to be a published author now?
It feels great, honestly. Uh, I think it's really helping me a lot being that I am depressed because I don't really do anything, honestly, and having this as being like, oh, I'm a published author, it gives me that accomplishment and that feeling that I'm doing okay and that I shouldn't feel so bad about myself like all the time. So it feels really good and it makes me at least a little bit more confident and boost my ego just a little bit. But yeah, I really love it and enjoy it so much.
Amen to all of that. And here you are, panelist at the Kentucky Women's Book Festival in great company and with a lot of people who are glad to have you here. Persia, thank you so much. Awesome as ever. I'm totally blown away by your chapter, as I've told you 1,000,000 times. Everybody at home, give a big round of applause to my friend Persia Archie Smith, and go pick up her book, which you can do at Carmichael's Booksellers here in Louisville. More on that later. Thanks, Persia. Go ahead and mute your mic and turn off your camera. And let's see if we can get Nadia on the line. Nadia Green is a recent graduate of Central High School. She's now a student at the University of Louisville. And Halima, can you see Nadia on the screen yet? No? Okay.
Hello.
Are you there?
Yeah.
Is she on the screen yet? Hey, Nadia, try turning on the camera. Okay, we're good.
Yay.
Folks there in TB Land can tell this is a team operation here at LSP headquarters. I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Nadia, who's gonna introduce herself and her chapter and then read an excerpt. Thank you, Nadia.
Well, thank you. Well, my name is Nadia Green, and I'm a student at the University of Louisville. And today I will be reading an excerpt from my chapter, I Am the Dancer I Wanted to Be. It was a fondue coupe, tendu ball change, releve coupe passe, and balance combination. With left hand at the bar, starting with preparation in second, feet in fifth position. Classical ballet is like math. There is a right way to do everything. A lot of dancers start off their studies with classical ballet because they are often told it is the foundation of all dance, and it teaches techniques and mechanics that are universal throughout any form of dance. Most of my years of instruction were a contemporary amalgamation of ballet, jazz, and modern, all of whose movements and vernacular stray away from Eurocentric dance and bring in elements of dances originating from Africa and the African American culture. I've only taken 3 years of classical ballet, so when I encounter the dance form, it's usually much more advanced than anything I've ever experienced. The contemporary ballet company, Complexions, founded by 2 dancers from the Alvin Ailey Dance Company, had come to Louisville to give master classes and hold mock auditions for young dance students from the Louisville Ballet, Louisville Dance Alliance, and the group I danced with, Arts Reach, which offers female students professional grade dance classes in the ballroom in the Chestnut Street YMCA. It would be a practice audition where the instructors would tell us what most professional auditions would expect from us. The other girls in the room were around my age, but they were a lot taller and slimmer. Clusters of dancers were scattered at the bars that stretched across the room, and they chatted as they stretched. It seemed like most of them knew each other. All of them were wearing some form of leotard and tights. Some wore pink tights and black leotards, while others wore black tights and flashy leg warmers, or maybe even a tan leotard and tights. The instructors, 1 male and 1 female, were all at least 7 years older than me. It was so surreal seeing the ideal dancer in real life. Long legs, slender frame, short torso, and long neck. I was mesmerized by the difference between me and them. And not too much older than me, the male dancer was even from Louisville and had reached heights and accomplishments that I could only dream of. They were bubbly and energetic as they encouraged us to stretch before the first bar exercise. All of us from Arts Reach wore sweats and stood barefoot, while the dancers from the Louisville Ballet and Louisville Dance Alliance had ballet shoes, leotards, and tights. They were all tall and towered over me, compared to the other dancers who spend 6 days a week in the dance studio, compared to our 1 day a week. I knew we had no chance of impressing anybody. I glanced around me, making eye contact with the girls from other groups. Their eyes were trembling anxiously, and I couldn't help but chuckle, thinking, they'll be fine. It's the Arts Reach dancers who should be worried. Do we even belong here? Yet I wouldn't let myself be intimidated. I posted myself at the front bar so I could see the two instructors' feet, while the other girls from Arts Reach lingered in the back. It was clear to me that this audition would be difficult. As a child, I breathed dance. I didn't spend the Saturday mornings of my childhood watching cartoons. I spent them in unoccupied school buildings and vacant church classrooms used as makeshift dance studios. I've been dancing since I was 2 years old, and even back then, I can remember having a knack for performing. There was something so familiar about the feeling of ice cold floor tiles shifting under my feet as we prepared for various dance showcases and concerts. The lights, the piercing spotlights, and the horizon filled with people as I looked off the stage. I've never felt more at home. No matter how reserved I may be, I love being on stage. I considered the meaning of the words during the first combination. Fondue to melt, coupe to cut, passe to pass, tendu to tighten or stretch. I was no longer used to ballet, and the complexity of the combination took me by surprise. Once the music started, my foot followed one step behind the dancers from the Louisville Ballet and the Louisville Dance Alliance. Of course, I thought. The instructors glided around the classroom, watching our feet and posture with the professional's intensity. And when they got to my bar, they gave off this sympathetic smile and quickly turned their eyes away from me. I shrugged off the embarrassment of the first bar exercise. Don't let them see you fail, I told myself. And in my mind, I had done to the best of my ability, and I was content. I could see that the other girls from Arts Reach were struggling too. It was difficult to keep up when you had never experienced something like this, but we continued to make it work. At the end of the audition, we were sat down in the center for feedback by numbers: 16, 19, and 20. We were shocked by your ability to be uncomfortable and embarrassed, and still do your best, they said. I tightly closed my lips and chuckled under my breath. Was that really supposed to be a compliment? With the few words, the professionals had solidified everyone's thoughts in the room. You're not meant to be here. They're not meant to be here. This is an experience to prepare you for the future. This should give you a signal about whether you should continue to strive to dance professionally or you shouldn't. And their words clung to us like molasses. The other dancers in the room couldn't help but look back at us. We silently looked back and forth at each other, and in that silence, we knew it was time for us to leave. We grabbed what was left of our existence as dancers and left quickly while everyone else stayed behind, trying to speak with the instructors. We exchanged a few glances and nods before everyone finally left. I can't really put a finger on what makes me want to dance. It's something that just flows. Dance is an escape from the life I normally live. Real life is depressing and boring. It reeks of pencil shavings and the ticking of analog clocks. Performance is a disembodiment from the rest of the world. When I dance, sing, or act, my brain goes static and my body and lips move on autopilot. But everything comes to an end. There is no such thing as forever. And in a world that is constantly changing, so do the minds of the people within it. I'm different. I spend more than half a decade giving myself to the art. I'll always remember the trips and falls, the sore calves, and the beautiful choreography that came during recitals and showcases and concerts. All these moments are scrapbooked in my brain to recall at any moment. For the longest time, I walked a thin line with dance. I found myself spilling over to one side more than one time. I love dance, but I also don't want to commit. With organized dance, there comes a need to be conventional, the dancer that everyone wants me to be. But I'm not here to please others. The dancer that I want to be can change her mind at any time and place in her life. So maybe I'll pick up a performance every now and then. I'll always be a dancer, no matter what stage of life I'm in. The ideas that dance has embedded in my mind are continuously in effect. Active recall, self-discipline, and precision. They have all made me the person I am today. All the dancing I did wasn't enough to make me the dancer complexions wanted. But I don't think I wanted to be that dancer. I'll come out stronger. Just wait and see. I am so grateful to be here today. It's actually been a really long time since I've read my chapter like that or read anything out loud in a performance type of way. But what I want to do right now is kind of unpack the writing process and unpack what I went through when it came to building my chapter. There were so many of my aspects of my life that I could have explored, and I did have the chance to explore. But for example, I struggle with chronic migraines and hemiplegic migraines. I could have talked about that. I could have talked about my battle with depression and anxiety, but obviously I couldn't talk about everything. That would have been way too overwhelming and chaotic. But throughout my piece and the writing of my piece, one thing I had always discussed is dance. For example, the one reason I had to stop dancing was because of my migraines. And the one reason I wanted to continue dancing was because of my struggle with depression and anxiety. And dance has always had the longest impact on my life and has been one of the most continuous things in my life. And so I think that's why I really settled on talking about dance. And one of the main themes of my chapter is the ability to change your mind. And I really wanted to drive that home and say that it's okay sometimes to never have an answer, to never know exactly what you want to do at all times. You wouldn't be human if you did. In a way, this chapter has helped me come to terms with that part of myself, my hobbies and my hobbies, ideas, anything that I want to do. It's so all over the place and spread out. And I've never really had a final idea of, oh, I want to do this or, oh, I want to do that. And I think this chapter has made me realize that that's okay. And it's okay.
I hear that. Nadia. Yeah, there's a lot going on in your chapter that I think bears discussion and rereading. I mean, I have literally read all of your chapters 500 times, and I'm actually constantly stunned by the new things that I sort of discover when I read them. For instance, this week when I've been rereading your chapter, I have found this sort of tension that exists in the chapter between what you're experiencing in the scene at the audition and your recollections of your time as a dancer when you were a really young kid. What was the name of the dance company you danced with when you were a kid?
The Lanita Neal Rocknets.
Right, and Miss Neal was your dance teacher. Can you talk a little bit about how, like, those scenes about when you were a kid play off of and are in conversation and are in tension with the scene at the audition, and how that figures into your the story that you're telling here?
Right. So let's start off with complexions. Complexions is said to be dance for everyone. They have 26 different dancers, and all the dances look different because there's 26 different dances, 26 different dancers. And when I grew up with Miss Neal and dancing, nobody looked alike. And so when I came into it, I was like, oh, this will kind of be like what I went through when I was with Miss Neal, that everybody has their own unique style and everybody has sure, we know the basics. Everybody knows the basics, but we also have this unique style to us, the way we move, the way we talk, the way we dance. But when it came to complexions, even though they said that, it wasn't the case. And so in complexions, Sure, all the dancers are of different heights and genders and sexualities and things like that. That is the difference. And they do that very well. They explore so many different cultural groups when it comes to that. But I did not feel like I was home. And I wasn't expecting to feel that way, but I was expecting to find some similarities and be able to feel comfortable in the room. But that was far from the truth.
Yeah, I mean, so when we run these workshops, one of the things I frequently talk about, and what you all have heard from me a bunch, is sort of like universals and having tensions and ideas and subjects in our stories that are sort of universally applicable. You know, that folks in the audience, or the readership, I should say, even while they may have not experienced the same types of dilemmas or obstacles or experiences, something rhymes in their life. You know, something sounds like an experience they have been through. What is that in your chapter? What is the sort of what's at stake that the reader can get involved in?
One of the things that is the real root of the story is that being singled out. A lot of people have been singled out and have been just completely outcasted. And that was one moment that made me think, am I actually a dancer if I can't do this? Am I a real dancer? Am I even I felt for a moment like, dang, I'm really not supposed to be here. Like, I'm so out of place. And that everybody else in the room was just like, and everybody else in the room knew it. And that was the real deal of it. One of the girls in the other dance group came up to us and was just like, well, if I did hip hop, then I wouldn't know what I was doing, and I would be so uncomfortable too. And I was like, first of all, who told you we was uncomfortable? Second of all, I don't do hip hop either. I'm a jazz dancer. I do modern and jazz. Right. I really wouldn't know what I was doing if I was doing hip hop either. So where do we go from now? Where do we go from this conversation now?
Right. Yeah, you know, one of the things that I love about your chapter is that it has this super tight focus. It's very scene based, and your writing about those scenes is so rich. You really are inside of the moment with the narrator. But the tension and the focus of it is like I say, pretty tight. It pretty much is an exploration of your history as a dancer, and this one moment where something changed, or where you had to acquire some new perspective. So what I said to you the other day, was another thing that just sort of stood out to me this week on reading your chapter, was like, there's nothing in this chapter that leads me to believe that you are that this revelation you've had about being able to choose, that it seems so genuine and real, and it's so sort of liberating for the reader to get to the end of the chapter and sort of live through this with you. Can you talk about that realization, and how did you arrive at it, and how did the writing process sort of figure into that?
For me, I've always been on such a very straight and narrow path. For the longest time, I thought that I was going to be a dancer. I had been dancing for 14 years. And then all of a sudden, when I got out of middle school, I was like, I'm tired of it. I need something different, anything different. And so that's when I kind of fell in love with doing business and being in the business magnet at Central and things like that. But then I was just like, but I still love to dance, and I joined a play when I was in Central. I had done plays before when I was in middle school and things like that. And that was also something that I really enjoyed. But I was like, man, if I want to become an entrepreneur, then I may just have to give up on that, because it would take up a lot of my time. But I've always found myself, and it's like, well, no, maybe you could do this or just do that. Or maybe I've always been thinking that I've just had to choose. And writing this chapter really made me realize that I don't have to. Nobody's ever told me actually that I have to choose. It's always been something that I tell myself. And that I have the free will to speak, to choose what I want to do because it's my life and it's my journey and I can do what I want with my life to a certain extent.
Right. I love hearing that, Nadia. That's amazing. I want everybody to give Nadia a big round of applause. Her chapter is just a phenomenal piece of memoir and creative nonfiction. I really encourage you all to pick up the book. It's really well done. She really carried it off. So thank you so much, Nadia, for being here and for giving that awesome reading. That was really fantastic. Let's see here. Maybe we can get Anaya Cherry to unmute and turn her camera on. Anaya, are you there?
Yep, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Halima's going to tell me if I can see you too. Oh yeah, there you are. All right, friends, I want to introduce my friend Anaya Cherry, who's going to introduce herself a little bit and also do an excerpt of her chapter. And it's a really amazing chapter, and I'm so glad to be joined by Anaya today. Anaya, take it away.
Okay, first I just wanted to say thank you guys for being here. My name is Anaya Cherry. I am a senior at Central High School, and I'm just going to read an excerpt from my chapter, which is called Still Yourself, But Not the Same. Throughout all the emotional, spiritual, and psychological effects of my parents' divorce, my mom didn't really have time to manifest and be to herself. She was like a double knotted string, and she was confused about how to get out of her previous relationship, but she wanted to be loved. I was 8 years old when my mother had introduced us to a new man. I remember him being super tall, 6'6", buff. He always wore baggy old clothing and any old sneakers he could find, and his head was always freshly shaved. He had this slight smile to his face, but it was more so of a smirk. It wasn't a normal smile. It was deception. The smile of a faker, the smile of a liar, the smile of a hurt human being, the smile of a broken soul, the type of smile a man puts on right before he lays his hand on your mother, the type of smile he puts on while whipping that same hand across her face repeatedly, the type of smile that gloats when hearing her children scream at the top of their lungs for someone, anyone, to help. It was the same smile he uses with her children after pretending like everything was going to be okay and nothing ever happened. The same smile he showed us when we saw her every time she had a black eye or a broken nose, and he promised that he'd never do anything to hurt her again. I copied that same smile from our professional pictures once. I woke up the morning after Easter, ready to finally get these pictures over with. I practiced my smile as we walked in. As I leaned against the white stool decorated with flowers, he stood there next to me, breathing over my shoulder and forcing me to smile a very painful and insincere smile. He whispered to me the entire time, promising me those same lies he'd promised to my mother and our family. It's okay. Everything's going to be just fine. He gently touched my face, pulling both sides of my mouth upward, positioning my face for a smile. When my face returned to a scowl, he would apply force like he did to my mother. I'd get extremely scared and anxious when he came around. Being alone with him made me feel horrible inside. At times, I'd be so afraid that I'd bust into tears. I was always so overwhelmed with fear, and crying was my only release. He made my siblings and me read the Bible several times a week. We took turns reading one verse apiece. He listened, and then he had us reflect on what we read, trying to make us understand it. But I don't think he even understood it. Sometimes when I had to read a verse alone to him, he tried so hard to be this comforting dad that it made me want to throw up inside. He said that only he would be allowed to work and provide for the family, so that meant my mom was forced to be a stay-at-home mother once again. The thought of her getting a job just completely ate him up inside. He didn't like independence, but especially not for a woman. My mother stayed with this man for about 2 more years, and finally, one day he got drunk, wrecked his van into a pole, and was arrested for DUI and reckless endangerment. We finally moved out while he was in jail. My mother didn't tell him we were leaving. We just left and never returned. In some ways, the abuse never stopped, though. It roamed through my head at night when I was sleeping. Something as simple as a cabinet slamming still makes me think of all the times that the cabinet slammed in our house when my mother was pushed around. For most people, that sound means nothing more than getting some food, but for me, it means a lot more. It means aggression. It means someone's in trouble. It's a call out for help. It sets me back, stops me from being the best me that I can be. I know how much I've grown, but I can also see the ways that I'm still stuck in the same exact place I was years ago. Every day I continue this, replacing the voice that tells me I need to be good to everyone with another that says I'm good to those who are good to me, and I protect myself from those who are not. I've shown enough compassion to those who've hurt me. Now it's time for me to show compassion for myself. I've been thinking about an undeniable truth that the victims of abuse share. When it's all over, people expect you to come out victorious. No one tells you how hard it is to not feel like you're still trapped. No one tells you about the endless nights that you stay up because you can't sleep, or the nights you get shaken up out of your sleep from the nightmares of PTSD. No one tells you how to overcome those things. It's something that I had to go through for myself. Although you will come out victorious, you will not come out the same as you were when you entered. You will be broken but hopeful, healed but scarred. There will be changes in yourself and the way you interact with other people, but these changes might not be apparent until you live on day by day and start feeling amiss. You are still yourself, but you are not the same, and that is okay. Okay, so first I just wanted to talk about like kind of why I wrote about my story and how I wrote about my story, why I chose something so, traumatic to me to write about. I feel like my story is very encouraging for other women who are going through domestic violence, or even other women who like might be having simple signs of going through domestic violence and they're just not even quite there yet. I know when I was a child and I was going through this, I was so young that no one in my family ever talked about it. And really, you would never even knew that I was going through something so traumatic if you didn't know me as a person, or you weren't like literally my aunt or my grandmother. It was just something that we never was able to talk about in my family. I never talked about it with anyone besides my siblings because they were, my first instinct to go to. We were the ones who called out for help and called the police or whatever. And so thinking back on that, when we did call the police and we did try to go to authorities, it was never anything that would change for us. It was always the same results. He'd always come back and it just all started all over again. So I feel like that is a recurring process for women who are in domestic violence. So I feel like that's kind of why it is a hush story and people aren't so open and encouraged to tell their story because, what happens when you do tell your story? So I feel like my story is kind of a positive outlook for those women, that there is still hope, even though you might not be like, super okay after the process. It's okay to not be okay. I just wanted to encourage other people to, speak up and come out and, get out of that situation if you can, and, just know that there is a sense of hope for you.
Yeah, and I think that message is certainly one of the most important in your chapter, which is, to be honest, devastatingly apt and important and significant to, unfortunately, so many women who have similar experiences. So, as I've told you 1 million times, the resolve and bravery you've shown speaking out about your experiences it's humbling as ever. And I'm still so proud of you for what you've accomplished. I want to know from you, you've written in such a compelling and frequently poetic way about your experiences. Really, the question I think probably on many people's minds is, what was that process like? Why did you keep going? You've spoken about the importance to the readers and to women who may be experiencing similar things, and that's very well met and terribly important. Why did you keep going?
For me, like I said, I didn't ever talk about this experience with my family. My mother had never shared anything, her feelings, even after it had happened. So for me, I just kind of wanted to have a sense to vent about my story and, speak up and just basically lay it all out. And in the end, whenever my family was able to see or read the story, I just wanted them to know that that's how I felt at the time, because I wasn't able to tell them myself at the time how I felt. So that's pretty much why I kept going and writing my story. It was just a sense of venting for me.
That, and I think you're speaking to what I discussed earlier a little bit, like the power of the initial writing process and kicking the editor off your shoulder and just going and writing through and out your experiences. In fact, I remember the central sort of poetic part of the excerpt that you just read, and I think of the whole chapter about the smile. I remember the day that you walked into the workshop and shared that in workshop, and everybody was just gobsmacked. That's something that came out of you in one piece, one night. Do you remember that moment when you wrote that sort of centrally important part of the chapter and what it was like?
I do. I remember coming in and we had like a workshop and everyone else had read their stories, and I think it was my time to go, and I just came out about my story, and no one else had actually like came out about something so traumatic that happened in their life, and I didn't really know what I wanted to write about at that point. So I couldn't really think of anything that had happened to me that I wanted to reflect on. So then, I just remember like thinking like, what is something that I could write about? What is something that has happened to me that is so empowering and impacting on my life? Because I had bottled all those feelings up and just shoved them deep back in the back of my mind, trying to forget them, because that was what I was told to do, And so when I came out about this story, everyone was kind of like super shocked, because I had never read anything so powerful like that in class. So that was kind of what it was like for me with that story.
I was sitting right across from you. I mean, like I say, we were just gobsmacked. And frankly, I would like to say that type of vulnerability in a community of writers in a workshop, there's sort of an aspect of breaking the seal, if you will. It's so liberating to hear from other people when they have been vulnerable and when they are sharing at such a sort of deep and integral level. So I think that's really one of the powers of the workshop is just hearing from your peers in a way that feels safe and supportive. What was it like for you? And before I ask this question, I'll say that about halfway through the workshop, we stopped doing share outs because we had a book to put out. But that first part of the workshop in which we were doing share outs and sort of building this community, what was it like to hear from your colleagues, from your peers in the workshop?
Like I had said, it was like when I had read my specific stories, everyone would always give like, amazing feedback. Everyone was always so supportive. So that kind of encouraged me to write my story a little bit more, because I'm like, oh, okay, people aren't like super, hushed about my story like my parents were, like my family was. They actually want me to, they're actually interested and wanted me to speak about the story. So that was very helpful for me, seeing that everyone wanted to hear from me and, actually was interested in my story. That definitely helped me a lot. And hearing from other people and their stories were so like, empowering as well. That encouraged me to write about my specific story and not hush it anymore, because everyone else wasn't scared to write about what they were writing about, or it didn't seem that way to me. So I was, that was very encouraging to me.
Right. I'm always super gratified to hear that from you all. I think another question probably on a lot of people's minds is, now you've published a book. this story is in the world and is a sort of the experiences that you shared are now sort of broadcast today on this call and to readers in their homes. What has anything changed at home for you, and what has this chapter been like for you and your family?
Definitely. Like I always say, my mom, she was, the number one person who was, a victim of abuse. So she didn't ever talk to me even after like I wrote the story. She never talked to me. Obviously, I had asked her if it was okay, to speak about the situation. And still, even in that moment, she never spoke to me about what she was feeling or anything like that. And so after the story had actually came out, she obviously wanted to read the book or whatever. And after she had read the book, it was just like, super emotional for her. And, she came forward to me and obviously, she told me a lot of things that, answers that I was searching for when I was a child, and a lot of comfort that I was searching for. And so that obviously is very comforting for me. My family now, we can not joke about it, but in a way we can speak about it as we weren't before. And then, like I say in my story, something as simple as a cabinet slamming was always so traumatic to me, and things like that just don't affect me anymore because I was able to vent. I feel like it was I don't know. I just love that I was able to come out and share that story, and, that helped me so much in that way. And I didn't know then at the time that it would help me. So, yeah.
Yeah, you just can't know what it means to me to hear you say things like that, because it is such an important story and not one that was easy to tell. So thank you again for the work that you put into this and for your voice and for your story, which are just terribly important for the rest of us to hear. Thank you, Anaya.
Thank you.
All right, my goodness. Okay, Anaya's gonna stop her camera and mute. And folks, we have another reader before the Q&A. I'd like to introduce my friend Halima Omar, who's going to unmute her microphone and turn on her camera. And Halima is going to read you from her chapter. Halima's going to read you from her chapter and introduce herself, and then unpack the narrative a little bit. Halima, take it away. Thank you.
My chapter is called Days Within Days, and I'm going to start reading. I have always liked for my brother Abdulhab, especially when we were kids. I guess it was because we were close. I wanted to play soccer with him and his friends, so I would listen to him and do what he told me. One day, we were walking to Duxi, a Islamic school, and he told me he didn't want to go. He already finished the Quran, so he wanted to play with his friends. I told him that he told me that he would be back before class was over. I told him okay. When class was over, I waited for him for a while, then went home, hoping that he was already gonna be there. But he wasn't home. My family asked me where he was at, and I lied to them and told them he was playing with his friends after class. As the day went by, my family started to worry and asked me, "Where is your brother?" I lied again. Hours later, we heard the familiar sounds. It was happening again, but this time I had no idea where my brother was at. The Somali government was fighting Al-Shabaab, and we lived in between the two groups. When they got into fights, we were affected heavily. Some days, more than 100 people would die in terrorist attacks, but no one talked about it, not even the news. Mothers buried their children, and kids lost their parents. Every day I used to hear gunshots like it was the 4th of July. Sometimes I would go to sleep and wake up to them in the morning. It got to the point where it became an alarm. When the fighting started that day, my family gathered together and asked if everyone was there. We slowly walked to the mosque because their walls were strong enough that bullets wouldn't go through. When we got there, I looked for my brother Abdulhab there. I thought that it was all my fault, that I should have held the light for that long. And when it got silent again, we looked for him. Hours later, he came home as if nothing happened. The whole time he was gone, he was with the Ethiopians, who was in Somalia at that time to stop the civil war. Even though I was mad at him, I was also mad at myself for lying to my family. I promised myself not to lie anymore, especially in serious situations. Remembering Somalia can be painful. I sometimes feel like my past is a shadow that follows me everywhere I go. Sometimes from nowhere, I remember things from my past. They feel like dreams, like witnessing my best friend dying, the feeling I got when I heard my grandma had been shot, or realizing that some people I used to see every day are now gone forever. Even though it been 10 years ago, those feelings and memories will never go away. I sometimes tell myself that the things I went through were just imagined. So much has happened in my childhood. Some things that I don't remember, and some things that make me laugh. In Somalia, when boys used to play, they used to say his name, Muhammad Ali. The winner got to be him. They pretended to be strong as him. I remember asking about him, and they would laugh at me and say, "How do you not know him?" Muhammad Ali is known in many Muslim countries because he fought for many things and is an example of greatness. Back home, Muhammad Ali was an inspiration to all. He was the light to their darkest day. Even though I never met him in real life, when he died, I cried. He touched my soul and spoke as he was speaking to me. Years ago, I didn't even knew Kentucky existed, and now it has become my new home. When I get a call back home, I tell them that I go to the same high school as Muhammad Ali, and they don't believe me. Sometimes I don't believe it myself. All my life, I wanted to meet this man everyone talked about. To end up in his hometown, to go to his high school, seems like a dream. Life has its up and downs, but it's nothing to compare to what I already faced. If I had known that I would make it to Somalia and grew up to be this age, I would have been more brave. I would have shown more love to people who didn't make it out. I went from nights when I used to pray to God to give me death to nights now I thank Him for giving me life. I just want to talk about why I chose this story to share. I feel like there's other stories that I could share, but this one was something that was a part of me that I couldn't go away from because it affected my whole life. And even if I wanted to lie and say that the emotions that I was feeling during this time was nothing, I would be lying because it was too emotional. And I had the chance to talk to my parents and my grandma about this story, and it was something different, and I got to hear their side of the story, and they it was something I always wanted to talk about, but I just never had the chance or the guts to do it out loud. And writing it down and in a book was something just wonderful, in my opinion.
Yeah, Halima, as you can imagine, it's always incredible for me to hear the ways in which the process has been sort of revelatory for you all. Again, that your excerpt is sort of another example of a really hard-hitting and impactful story in this book. And y'all don't pull any punches, no pun intended, but the reference to Ali. Y'all don't pull any punches in this book. Could you discuss a little bit, sort of the same question I asked some of the others? What was your process for writing through such difficult topics and recollections? How did you do it? How did you keep going?
Oh wow. That's a good question. At first I was telling myself that it was too personal. I shouldn't share it. But then I got to the point where I told myself that if I share my story, that it would give somebody else a hope, I guess, that even though someone can go through things like that, that they can still make it out, you know? So, and I read something before. It said every tear is a word that needs to be written. And that was deep. So I kept that in my mind all the time when I was writing. I was
Whoa.
up at night trying to write it.
I've never heard you say that. I kind of wish we would have gotten that in there. That's beautiful. Will you say it again?
Every tear is a word that needs to be written.
Yikes. Wow, that's really something. Yeah, I mean, your story does a lot of movement. Actually, it's interesting in the ways that sort of on the other side of the spectrum from, for instance, Nadia's story, which has this very tight focus, your story manages to get from when you are a little kid in Somalia to Kenya to Kentucky. You and I talked about a roadmap a lot. Do you care to talk about sort of the process of you writing your chapter and how you actually got all of that in there? What are some of the things that you did in the workshop?
The reason I got everything in there was because I talked about like the events that led to other events. For example, when I lived in Somalia, the reason we moved to Kenya was because of the war, and you know, we was affected heavily, and we lived by it. And then when we moved to Kenya, I talked about my mother and how she was in America at the time, and how she wanted us to be with her. And I also talked about the times where when I got here, you know, so each one was, you know, an event that was leading to the next one. And
Right.
that made it easier for me to write it down.
Yeah, so there's little chunks in your chapter, and they're sort of interspersed by, for instance, the last part of the excerpt that you read, these sort of thoughtful and poetic musings. You have this really natural poetic voice, which is remarkable. How many languages do you speak?
1, 2, 3, around 4.
Right.
Yeah.
So the ways that you were able to be poetic in English were just really beautiful and stunning. Again, I really encourage the folks out there on TV land today to pick up the book and just sort of you know, be blown away by what these authors were able to achieve in the workshop and some of the natural talents that they showcased as writers. It's pretty incredible. Halima, what you opened this excerpt by talking about your older brother Abdi Wahab, who is actually another LSP alum, my friend Abdi Wahab. You all real tight as kids. What's it like now? Are you still covering for him sometimes?
Yes, I am. At nighttime when he goes out and my mom doesn't want to open the door, I open the door for him. It's like it's something that will never get old. I don't understand. I tell myself not to do it, but I just see myself doing it. So it just, I don't know. I feel like growing up, I always like look out for my, you know, siblings, because that's all I had growing up since my mother was here and my father was back home. So it's just us, and that's all I had.
Yeah, you all definitely took care of each other through some very hard times that you talk about in the chapter. Let's see. Last question before we switch to the Q&A. What is it like in your family after having written this chapter? What is it like for you to have shared this with your family and for them to sort of report back about your shared experiences with them?
Sometimes when I tell like my side of the story, they're like, "Oh my God, I didn't know you was feeling that way," or "You was experiencing this." So it's very interesting knowing our stories. Even though we went through the same things, we still have like different emotions of how we feel different about like different topics, you know. So it was very interesting. And I like sometimes talk to like my family back home, and they try to say, "Do you remember this?" And I'm like, "Yeah," and they're like, "How?" And I'm like, "Cause I used to talk about it. I feel like we're pretty open about what happened. We talk about it, and sometimes even joke about stuff, you know, that seemed really serious to other people. It just became things that we just share."
Yeah. I think on that note, I'm gonna figure out a way to transition to the Q&A and just say that to sort of piggyback on what Halima is describing here and what some of the authors have described. The title of the book really does cut to the quick of the matter. These authors have managed to write through and write about and into some really difficult moments in their lives. Our hope always is that this is done to everyone's mutual benefit, the storyteller and the listener, and that communion between the reader and the author can really establish an understanding of shared experiences, even when the specific circumstances can be so different. Our aim at Louisville Story Program is to introduce neighbors to one another and to provide a space where folks can really understand more about what we all share in common. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to the Q&A session, and I would encourage all of my authors to go ahead and turn on their cameras and microphones, and we will see how it goes. And thank you all so much for having us today and hearing from these authors. The book is available at Carmichael's Booksellers from LouisvilleStoryProgram.org, and if you're on the internet, you can follow your nose and you'll get there. Thank you so much for having us.
Alrighty, and I'll transition us over to the Q&A portion. So thank you to all the authors and to Joe Manning for helping tell their stories in this inspirational thing. Let's show them some love in the chat. Give a thumbs up, a heart. So anybody who's just joined us, I'm Miranda Massman, and I'll be moderating this Q&A session. So if you have any questions for any of the authors specifically, or to anyone in the group, you can go ahead and play those in the chat. And if you want them to be specific in their name, just place their name in the comment. We may not be able to get to answer all the questions, but we'll try to get through as many as we can. So to start off, I'll ask the entire group, since they're all inspiring women, do they have any women that have inspired them in their lives specifically? And if they could go ahead and turn their cameras on, all four of the authors.
Authors, can you turn your cameras and microphones on?
Oh, see two. All right.
Thanks, you all. Miranda, the question was, do you mind to repeat it again?
Yeah, sure. So the question was, since all four of you are inspiring women, do you have any women who have really inspired you in your life?
Anybody want to jump in?
I'll go first. For me, I would say my mother and my grandmother, because they also went through a hardship in their life, and they still managed to keep hope in their heart. And no matter what happens, they're always telling me, like, you can do it. You can keep going and keep pushing it. So I feel like they inspire me to not just be great, but like I could do anything that I want if I put my mind to. They always push me to do better, I feel like.
For me, I feel like also it's very obvious would be my mother as well. She's very inspiring, and like she said, Halima, my mother never gave up. She's still fighting to this day, and you would never know that anything ever happened to her because she is so empowering. So I would have to say my mother as well.
For me, I think it's also my mother, being that she went through so much, and especially like growing up, we struggled a lot and like barely had money or food, and she kept going, especially for me, and I think that's just so admirable, and so she's like so inspiring to me.
Honestly, I'd have to say the same, my mother and my grandmother, because those are the two people who have stuck by my side the longest through thick and through thin. And I think that those are the people who have taught me the most valuable life skills in my entire life.
Well said, all of you. Okay, so a question from the chat. It was directed to Persia, but I think anyone can also answer it. So reflecting since the book has been published, reflecting on your experience. I know it was for Persia, it was 1.5 years ago. How have you reflected since then on your experiences you wrote about in your chapters?
Honestly, the only thing I would say is when it comes to my mental health, I am more talkative, and I also like talk to my mom more about it so I can at least get it out. I've been trying to maybe talk about therapy. I have I've been doing really well though. I'd say I've been trying to get my life together more, so that's good at least. But other than that, yeah, that's just all. That's my growth been so far.
And does anybody else want to reflect on their experiences since the publication?
I might jump in if nobody else is going to. As the, having spent so much time with these authors in the writing and revision process and having kept up with them, pretty frequently since the book's publication, I'm pretty dazzled by just what, I don't know, their fortitude, really. I mean, and especially having gone through COVID and having come out on the other side as published authors. Many of them graduated high school and started into college. I guess what I've been hearing from them is that the writing process and the publishing process has provided a sense of sort of grounding and a way to interpret their experiences. I'll let them say that, though, and that's not really for me to say, but I am sort of reporting what, the feedback that I get from them, which is, as always, and as I've said, just uniformly gratifying for me and for LSP to hear them talk about that.
Wonderful. Okay, so we have another question in the chat specifically for Ania. So violence in teen dating seems to be on the rise. What advice would you give to those in that situation?
I'm sorry, I don't think I heard your question. Could you repeat it?
Yeah, I'll repeat it. It's in the chat. So they're talking about, violence in teen dating seems to be on the rise. So what advice would you give to those in that situation?
What advice would I give to them? Just get out of the situation as quickly as you can. In a way, I feel like I've always been a type of person where I feel like I could change someone, or going back into the situation, someone would change the second time around, or the third. But manipulation is definitely plays a big part in domestic violence. So I say just look at those, be aware of manipulation and be aware of those key points. When people are trying to manipulate you and you think that they will change, they won't. Just get out of the situation as quickly as you can and, move on. There are plenty of people in the world. There's someone there for you. If someone's showing you that they're putting their hands on you and stuff like that, that obviously is not the person for you. So just move on.
Very wise words. Okay, we have one last question for all four authors. So now that you all are published authors, do you have any plans or aspirations to write and publish again? And if so, what would it be about?
I feel like I was not really into writing before writing for the program, but after I got into it, there's like a lot of stories out there, and I feel like every story is important, and there's stories that just need to be shared, and I don't know, I might get into writing, but I'm just gonna say let time do its thing, and I'm gonna see how that goes.
Personally for me, I don't think that I might get into writing anymore, but if I do, like in the future, I would do more so like actual fiction writing. But other than that, I don't think I would.
For me, I think it's a bit different. I've always wanted to publish a book. When I was younger, I don't know, I just would write in little notebooks all the time, and I thought I was like an author or whatever. So now that I actually am, it's kind of weird that I don't want to write another book either. I don't know why. I just don't. I feel like I did it, and it's just like, finally I wrote a book, but I don't really want to be like an author. I don't know. Well, I am, but you know what I mean. I don't want to write another book, you know what I mean?
I think that I really enjoy writing. And before writing this nonfiction piece, I have been working on a fiction piece since my junior year of high school. And so I really enjoy the idea of becoming an author. But one of the things that this project did was take me out of my comfort zone and make me write about myself and also employ new writing techniques. And so I think that if I were to, hopefully, if I were to continue my writing and things like that, it would be in the fiction realm, but I'd definitely be using some of the techniques that I learned here to guide my writing.
Thank you all for those answers. And if you should ever choose to publish, we would love to have you back at the festival to present once more. All right. So thank you to everyone for their great questions and to all four of you for your wonderful answers. We enjoyed your presentations, and we'll now turn it back over to Valerie Casey, Director of the U of L Women's Center, for some final updates and comments. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. I just want to say thank you so much to all of our presenters who were here today, and I hope everyone will show the love to them in the chat as we end the program today. We appreciate all of you being here. Please complete the online evaluation form that will be sent to you and return it to us by March 23rd. Don't forget, these wonderful books are available through Carmichael's, and as they've said, there are signed copies available, a limited number, if you put that into the comments as you check out at the register. And please stay engaged with the Women's Center. We'll be hosting our 4th annual Grace Hopper Celebration of Women in STEM on Tuesday, March 23rd, starting at 6 p.m. until 7:30 virtually on Teams. We'll acknowledge and celebrate these women with a keynote speaker, discussion, woman in STEM panel, and networking. It's open to all majors, high school students, and professionals. And now, Jamaica Jones, the program coordinator from the Women's Center, will lead all of us in a group photo. Jamaica?
You're able to actually today. For those who are comfortable, because I know not everybody, wants to be in pictures. It's Saturday morning. Some people might have just popped out of bed joining us, which I completely understand. But please turn your cameras on and I will get our virtual space set up for us. So since we cannot be physically on campus, I at least wanted to put us in like an on-campus setting. So I'll give people a few minutes to be able to turn their cameras on who wants to join. Or a few seconds. All righty, so get those beautiful smiles ready. Oh, got some more popping in. Awesome. Wait a couple more seconds. All right. I'm gonna do a couple photos because I always know there's at least one person, their eyes are closed. And so we're trying to get everyone's best sides with this today. All right. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. And we will be next week sending out an email with the recording of the video. And including the evaluation and additional information and all of the good stuff that we got today, including the video that we were not able to show for the story program. But again, thank you so much for joining us today virtually. We're hoping to see you guys in person next year. And definitely show some love for all of our authors today. They were amazing, but of course, women, we just are. But again, thank you. Please be safe, stay healthy, and we will see you next year. Thank you.